Welcome everybody. We're talking today about why monkeys matter. Please notice the spelling. I am not talking about this kind of monkey. That's in a different class. I'm talking about these monkeys. In case you don't know who they are, it's Davy Jones, Mickey Dolenz, Peter Tork, and Michael Nesmith, who in 1967, their albums outsold the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined. They had more album sales due to their exposure on television. So what I talk about, I'm doing a book right now on them, and so I'm talking about what we learned from them. And particularly, I focus on the writers of television programs and authorship. That's my thing, because we focus on directors as auteurs of film, and we don't realize, or we forget, that writers are just like the writers of books. A director can't direct 20 empty pages. Somebody put these thoughts down, and what are these thoughts? So how the writing staff of the Monkees brought the 1960s counterculture to mainstream preteen viewers, right? These are the children whose older brothers and sisters already love the Beatles, and they're learning about the hippie culture from the Beatles. But these kids don't have access to buying their own albums yet. They have access to television because it's free and they can watch it all the time. And their parents think this program is just a bunch of wild boys goofing around. And they are doing a lot of old vaudevillian stuff, so it seems very tame and very safe. In fact, I think that Enrico Bedrigozzi mistakes the Monkees for being plastic hippies or fake hippies and bringing this fake hippie culture to TV. But in fact, the actual actors and musicians were men of their time. They were real hippies, and so they were demonstrating their new beliefs and a new culture to the children. So I largely disagree with her in my book. In fact, the boys themselves, the men themselves knew it. In their film Head, they wrote a song that riffs on their opening theme, which was Here We Come, Walking Down the Street, right? They wrote, hey, hey, we're the Monkees, we've said it all before. The money's in, we're made of tin. We're here to give you more. So they were admitting their own plasticness, and I think that's their mistake. They fell for what was being said about them and forgot what they themselves were contributing, right? Someone who didn't miss out on that is Timothy Leary, right? He was the big famous sort of hippie doctor, right? And in his book, Turn On, Tune In, and Drop Out, he discussed the importance of the Monkees. And this is in their very own time period, right? In the late 60s, 67. He's discussing how important they were. In fact, he says the show is much more than a comedy. It's all these things together. My favorite one is a jolly Buddha laugh at hypocrisy, which in fact is what's going on. These boys are commenting on the hypocrisy of the parents of their customers, of their viewers. And they're doing it right on mainstream American television. This is a particularly fun quote. Timothy Leary has a long quote I won't read you about all the things, the silly nonsense going on. And at the very end of it, an actor like Mickey Dolenz would look right at the screen, right? So we're doing this metatextual, I'm fourth walling you. It's pretty good talking for a long-haired weirdo, huh, Mr. and Mrs. America? So he was right there telling him, we're laying something out here that you don't even notice. Shh, don't watch, right? And so I think that's really interesting. Also what's interesting is look at Mr. Dolenz's hair. It's all afroed. This was a huge new thing to show on television. First of all, long hair. But this is ethnic hair. This doesn't belong on TV. So in fact, in the first season, they had him iron his hair. They would not allow this vaguely white, although he's actually Italian and Native American. Or Afro, no, that's not allowed on television. It's not till the second season when they get a little more power that they start looking like they do in normal life. All right, so what do I say about the Monkees and the counterculture? What did they bring to TV? A lovely little pyramid. Their anti-war themes appear in the show. Anti-authority, so those are tied together. Anti-materialism, which is very much hippie. It's about what you do, not about what you own, what you have. Eastern philosophies. The fact that middle American Kansas kids are going to learn about Buddha while watching this TV show. That's an amazing concept. And then, just in general, their androgynous hippie clothing. Well, the boys are wearing girls' clothes. How is this possible, right? So all this stuff appears on this TV show. Peter Tork himself, and that's him at the Monterey Pop Festival, with Janis Joplin in the background. You know, they were friends. She was going to appear on the show in the third season. It never got a third season. Peter Tork is famous for saying that the Monkees probably garnered a larger audience for this hippie culture than the Beatles because of their weekly exposure on television. It was free entertainment for these kids. So they got the point across. And one of his points was these boys, these men in this period, had gone through a time when Eisenhower was God. He'd saved us in World War II. The men in charge were always smart. But then the Vietnam War showed up. And the men who used to be, who are now taken over, they didn't know what was going on. And that was a new thought for young Americans. I can't trust my leaders. They don't get it. They're getting me involved in something I don't want to be part of. So that's a huge new message to put out on television, right? And this is one example. I wish I could show you scenes, but we'd be here all day. But for instance, in one episode, the boys are all, as you can see, playing dominoes. When they knock all the dominoes down, one of them says, "What do you call this game?" And the other answers, "Southeast Asia." Hello? How did they get away with that if the censors weren't even listening? They weren't noticing the political aspect of that. And what I really love is the politics came with the commercials for cornflakes. So this is why people thought it was something they didn't have to pay attention to. It's just nonsense entertainment. But we're talking about the war in the middle of it. I just like pictures of scripts to remember that the writers are involved. I know the words are too small. But this is a script by Coslow Johnson. All the writers on the show, I have a whole chapter in my book on the authorship. All the writers ended up winning Emmys later in life. He got his for working on Laugh-In, which was also a very politically themed show. He wrote an episode called Monkeys Watch Their Feet, and it's about aliens taking over the teenagers of America. And so the monkeys are going to, save the day for them. So first of all, we have this patriotic business going on here. I'm standing, Mike Nesmith, with the flag. And Pat Paulson, who, if you remember, comically ran for president back in the day. He's giving a report to America about what's wrong with teenagers today, and it is that the aliens are taking over. But he talks about who we blame, right? Many of us blame our leaders. Many of our leaders blame us. This is how the teenagers, the hippie culture, is feeling. Then more so, he defines Mickey in this episode as someone tormented by a war he must fight in a country thousands of miles away. How could you get away with dissing the Vietnam War on modern American television in 1967? And they just flip it right through and you don't even notice it. All right, I think that's really fascinating. Then, this is a lovely little bit of dialogue. They want to put the blame on teenagers. Take the war, for example. Whose fault is it? Not ours. We're not fighting. It must be those crazy kids. They're the ones doing all the fighting. I mean, this is not just vaudeville happening. This is serious political commentary in the course of a teenage comedy show. You didn't get that on Full House when that was the big program in American television. Now, my favorite funny part is the very last episode of the show where they got away with a lot. It starred this alien plant. If you look at it a little closely, it resembles a plant that one wasn't supposed to know much about. In fact, only in certain states now are we supposed to know about it, right? This plant has come and its power is being taken over by a bad human who's using it to rule the world, right? I think that's funny. In the midst of this particular episode, they even have this anti-war song that they chant during a montage in the show. And if you just take a peek at that for a minute, it's kind of beautiful. I particularly like the last line. Two little kings playing a game. They gave a war and nobody came, which is it starts with and then no one shows up, and so the two kings are all alone. And so here we have this marvelous anti-war song in the midst of this. Also then, they save the plant before the bad human, of course our boys are the heroes. They save the plant, and the smoke that the plant creates, if you ingest it, it makes you not want to fight anymore. Just lay down in the grass and be cool. I mean, if that's not an anti-authority, let's all go smoke pot message, I'm not sure. And yet here it is on mainstream television for preteens, for 12 and 13-year-olds. Now, very briefly, anti-materialism. This sign was in their room, their apartment. Money is the root of all evil. That's not what we're about at all in this program. In fact, they have this marvelous episode called The Devil and Peter Tork, which has to do with Peter selling his soul to the devil for the talent of playing a harp, which he fell in love with at a pawn shop. And in the end, they prove to the devil, they take the devil to court to get his soul back. And in the end, they say, you never gave him anything. He had the talent within him all the time. He didn't want fame and fortune, right? He just wanted his music, right? And I love that. If you love music, you can play it. All it takes is love. And here's the hippie phrase of the period. Baby, in the final analysis, love is power. That's where the power is at. It's make love, not war. I mean, that's all right there, built into the storyline. Of course, an old piece of literature, right? We've got the devil and Dr. Faustus. Now, when we come to Eastern philosophies, if you know anything about Buddhism, they use this chant to get out of a situation. Obviously, they're all tied up. The bad guys have taken over for a moment. And Mickey remembers the chant, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And they chant it there. When I was a kid, I had no idea what that meant. But I thought to myself, in studying them now, I bet it means something besides gibberish language. Matter of fact, whoa, how'd that happen? My picture got laid over that. It's the Lotus Sutra. It's basically the teaching of the Buddha that all people have the ability to reach enlightenment. In the middle of a TV show about a bunch of it's amazing. I don't know how those flipped over, but this was my androgynous clothing, just to cover that theme for a moment. The poncho, right, the colors. How could you do that? This is in their second season. In the first season, they appeared like that. Much more 50s-ish, verging on early 60s, little Frankie Valli thing going on. So look at the change that was brought to their viewers in just one season, where you could see truly the hippie culture in its clothing. Now, this is all based on a book that I'm writing, and don't even bother reading all that, but those are all the chapters. And I just want to cover a couple of my favorite chapters, the one on feminism and the one on ethnic studies and the cultural collateral. So, feminism was what struck me because we were all little girls watching this program. And because of the way TV today, something that I do enjoy, Big Bang Theory, but really it's a show about who's going to have sex with which girl this week. And that's kind of what happens to females on TV sometimes these days. Because we had rules back in the day, 4 musicians should be about that too, and yet they weren't. Every girl that they met on this program in 58 episodes had her own job, took care of herself, or was going to school, cared about the culture and the world, and was involved in social justice issues. Nobody was a cheerleader. Nobody was rah-rah, look at me, I'm a ditzy blonde and I have no brain. They were all intelligent, interesting young women. The very first woman that we met was the princess of the Duchy of Harmonica, all right? So we're being funny. But she was a princess who had the opportunity to marry Davy, every girl's dream in that period. She turned it down because she had a duty to her country to go home and be its ruler. If that's not an empowered young woman, what a cool thing, right? And then just very simply, Julie Newmar, who we know as the Catwoman from Batman, she guested on an episode where they all wanted her to fall in love with them. And the line was, the fastest way to a woman's heart is through her mind. Through her mind. And so each boy tries to do the things she claims to enjoy. Poetry, classical music, ballet, all these high-end things. Not some silly nonsense. So all these episodes so I learned as a child, I think, or that's what I posit, that if I wanted to marry a monkey, I didn't want to be popular. I wanted to be substantial. I wanted to be a woman of some meaning, and that's what would attract them. And I think that's a really important message to give little girls. Not that I need to be gorgeous and have the perfect little outfit, right? So feminism is all through this thing. The other thing I enjoy is a chapter on ethnic studies. I'm Italian, and Mickey Dolenz himself was Italian, largely. This book, Feeling Italian, is really interesting. It talks about the Italian culture throughout America. I say that Mickey Dolenz showed up on time before we could have truly ethnic black culture characters. So Mickey is representing black culture in some ways. And this is true that happened often in the 60s. Italians stood in for African Americans, right? So for instance, this is from the Jungle Book, and this is King Louis. Anybody remember who voiced him? He's Louis Prima. The Italian singer did his voice. So the voice of a vaguely African character is an Italian voice. And I think that Mickey Dolenz represents that. This is another, I think, funny. Steven Van Zandt, right, from Bruce's band, also appeared on The Sopranos for many years. He always plays an Italian thug, generally. He introduced the Rascals to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with this quote, "To be white and sound that black, you've got to be Italian." And in my mind, he's defining Mickey Dolenz, whose voice was the harsher, the black voice of the group. And in fact, on stage, he would do James Brown music. So now he's bringing James Brown to a young, white, middle American audience who might not be allowed to listen to those stations, but they're listening to Mickey bring that to them. And he would do essentially an impression on stage, you'll notice with the whole tape. He was doing James Brown for them, so they knew what James Brown was, so they could go look into his work. In fact, the Monkees are also famous for introducing Jimi Hendrix to the mainstream. He was their opening act when they went on a concert tour around the country. Jimi Hendrix opened for the Monkees. Nobody believes me. I'm not making that up. He really, really, truly did. So again, Mickey Dolenz, as a character and as a performer, is bringing black music to the mainstream white teenage audience. That's a huge thing that parents might not have allowed, but the program was their gateway into that new world, right? And then I have a chapter on cultural collateral. How much the Monkees still resonate in American culture? We don't think so, but my gosh, they do. Particularly right after the show was canceled. This is a year and a half later. This is the most, I'm understood from the research I found, and when Davy Jones died in 2012, they announced this on CNN. This was the most rerun episode of television in the history of reruns. And it's this episode of The Brady Bunch where Marsha Brady has written a letter to her. She's the head of the Davy Jones fan club, and she wants him to sing at their prom. And he didn't get the letter on time, and so he isn't going to come, and her whole life is going to be ruined. And when he finds out accidentally, he comes to her and says, okay, yes, as a matter of fact, I can do that, but I need a date. Do you know anybody who'd like to go with me? This is the most rerun episode of television ever, and it's all based on love of the Monkees, right? Now, that's right in the day. You move forward many years, Shrek used I'm a Believer in their film. This is the huge Monkees tune that everybody around the world recognizes. Now, they let Smash Mouth perform it. I'd rather they let the Monkees perform it. But fact is, children watching Shrek have been exposed to Monkees music. Also written by Neil Diamond, by the way. They had really wonderful, Neil Diamond wrote for the Monkees. So we're moving ahead from the Brady Bunch to Shrek, and we move ahead to this period, Breaking Bad. In their last season, used the Monkees song Going Down, which is sung by Mickey Dolenz, again with that introduction to African-American music, in one of their montages while they were making meth. They used that song. And likewise, Mad Men, the other series, used the Porpoise song, which is from Head. So their music is resonating in this period because the writers of these modern programs were the children who watched the Monkees. And that music is the music of their childhood. Not necessarily the Beatles, because they didn't have time. They were too young to get on the Beatles bandwagon. But the Monkees were there for them, and it brought them into that culture. I think that's really, really amazing. And it all came from these four actors and the writers of their program. They put something into the American cultural mainstream that I argue is still there and still affects the current generation that we are. Thank you.